more than anything is the piece that can be, yes, the decision making and the accountability is fantastic, but the piece that can be harnessed at such an unsure time of life that is there's so much change in every area, like family relationships, romantic partner relationships, moving, finance, so much career bouncing. And the piece that can be found with mindfulness skills as well can make that time of life so much less painful and so much less scary. And at the very least, this stuff can, well, at the very most, honestly, can give you a sense of daily peace. And what a beautiful thing. We all want that.
Welcome to Successful with ADHD. I'm Brooke Schnittman. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Successful with ADHD. Today, I have Livi Redden. She's an author, TEDx speaker, content creator, and podcaster that guides teens and 20-somethings on how to intentionally steer their life through the power of emotional development, mindfulness, and accountability so they can live the fulfilling, joyful life they deserve. And you guys might be saying, how does this relate to ADHD? Well, I'll tell you that so many people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s tell me, I've never learned how to adult. Adulting is so hard. All the executive functions that go into it, no one teaches you how to do it. So Livi is here today because she's most known for her social media content surrounding the topics of adulting and impacted millions across her various platforms. She recently delivered the TEDx talk titled What No One Tells You About Your 20s, and it quickly is approaching 300,000 views. And a year ago, she published her book, The Sooner You Know, the Better, which is a great developmental book for emerging adults. And I had the pleasure to be on her podcast, Today is the Future, which has young listeners in 100 plus countries tuning in for conversations with inspiring and young individuals and world-class mentors to provide them with the inspiration and knowledge they need that they most likely aren't learning elsewhere. So welcome, Livi.
Thank you so much for having me. Hello.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. And I had the pleasure to be gifted Livi's book. And I have to tell you, it's pretty amazing because I didn't really start doing the self-development piece until I was in my mid-30s. I mean, I went to school for general education, special education, all of that. But I saw a therapist and I thought that that was like self-development. I had no idea. I also read like Chicken Soup for the Soul, but they don't teach you, like you said, in your 20s, how to adult. So what gave you the inspiration to write this book?
Yeah, that's a good question. My dad was sick for most of my growing up. He had ALS. And that got me into personal development really young because I was having conversations about death and grief and family relationships starting at like 12, and which are, pretty foreign conversations for a 12-year-old. And so I found answers in that realm pretty early on. I also started meditating when I was 15 or 16, which also really helped me through that time. And I remember when I was around 18, I was listening to a podcast of a podcast I listened to really often. And I had the realization where I noticed that no one like me was ever really talking to me in that realm. It was mostly like 40, 50, 60-year-old experts. And no one that was going through, like, I'm going through such a different growing up than the person, just like generationally, than the person that I might be listening to. And so I thought, why, even though I'm young and I might not have the experiences people have, I know how to make a young person feel seen. I know very similarly what they're going through because I've grown up in a similar era. And so I thought, why are we mainly pushing this content to 40 and 50-year-old women when really a lot of big decisions are happening in your 20s? And like, where is the advocacy for learning Also very tactical skills, like very tactical communication skills, emotional regulation skills, nervous system regulation skills. Like it's a toolkit. It could be taught by anyone to anyone, really. Like it's like learning the piano, a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like learning how to play the piano, like learning, it's all just a matter of practice. And
it's funny.
Yeah.
It's funny. I learned the piano back in the day, and all I know now is like chopsticks and heart and soul.
Yeah, I have a piano back here, but I never touch it. It's like, I used to play too.
But you said there's so many things that, like, so many decisions that 20-something-year-olds need to make. And in your book, you talk about 85% of life's most defining moments take place by the age of 35.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a study by Meg Jay. She's a PhD clinical psychologist. And the thing I like to note about that statistic is that it's not necessarily the best moments. It's not talking about all your best moments happen before 35, but oftentimes very big decisions that have lifelong impacts are happening before 35, whether that is choosing a life partner, whether that is having children, whether that is you're setting yourself up financially. That really matters in your 20s, early 30s. Career path, going into debt that could potentially affect you for the rest of your life. There's a lot of decisions happening. And of course, that's generally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, oftentimes there's a lot of really lifelong, impactful decisions happening. And we're just supposed to, like,
figure it out.
What? Figure it out with what toolkit? Like we don't have any decision-making skills.
I can't even tell you how many 30-something-year-olds, 40-year-old, 50-year-olds I'm dealing with on the flip side, right? They've gone into debt, are still trying to figure out their partnership. Of course, you can figure out ways to get out of it and build a better life for yourself at any age, right? You don't have to do it in your 20s, but if you could have that toolkit beforehand to try to set yourself up for success and learn from people who've made mistakes before, I mean, how amazing would that be? They don't teach you that in college.
Yeah. And I think more than anything is the piece that can be, yes, the decision making and the accountability is fantastic, but the piece that can be harnessed at such an unsure time of life that is there's so much change in every area, like family relationships, romantic partner relationships, moving, finance, so much career bouncing. And and the piece that can be found with mindfulness skills as well can make that time of life so much less painful and so much less scary. And at the very least, this stuff can, well, at the very most, honestly, can give you a sense of daily peace. And what a beautiful thing. We all want that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I know that they are implementing mindfulness in school now, not in every school, but I know when I left the school district and the school system, they were doing that as part of their social and emotional curriculum. But, I talk to people all the time, and imagine if we started our day with mindfulness in the school system, how that could help students any student, distracted or not, how it could center them before they go into being taught, feeling stressed out, having social issues and situations, being told what to do by teachers or adults, using a million executive functions. If they could just clear their brain and really activate as much as possible by mindfulness, how amazing that would be.
Yeah, it would be incredible. And I have, I've served on some boards and stuff working to get SEL into more schools because there is, although I focus on teenagers, it is incredible if you can, deliver emotional skills early on, like 5, 6.
Yes. And for those of you who don't know what SEL stands for, it's social emotional learning. So we do academic learning, but now I know at least in the New York State curriculum, they have to implement a social and emotional curriculum as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's it can allow the child, if you were to start a school day with mindfulness practices, not only does it allow the child to align themselves and take a body check, a mental check, also you're creating a lot of kids come from homes that are chronically anxious, chronically angry. And for a kid to have 15 minutes of a safe space where they can feel seen and provided the space to see themselves, and to regulate that nervous system like that, just like in a development sense, has such an impact on a child. Because what I found with what I do, for a really long time, a lot of my content was geared towards giving information, and now it's really geared towards helping kids feel seen, heard, and safe, because at a very core level, that is what people need most.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can give people the tools and accountability, but at the same time, they also need to feel like they're not alone, right? And have that community of people out there like you who get them and are able to help them. So you had a major life event. Your dad passed, unfortunately, from ALS. And that definitely, I see how that could tailspin you into figuring out like self-development and help at such a young age. But where did you go to learn all of that?
Yeah.
You said you were dealing with like 40 and 50-year-olds, but how do you process all of that?
Yeah, it's I think I was also, because I also started reading chicken noodle soup books starting in like third grade before any of that happened. I remember like me and my childhood best friend had like a fascination with the chicken noodle soup books when we were in like third, fourth grade. We would get together and we would read them.
The chicken soup for the soul?
Yeah. So I did have an early interest even before my dad got sick when I was 11. But as far as places to go, started going to therapy when I was like 14. I was really upset about that because I was like, I'm not messed up, I'm fine. And I liked it. Talk therapy has never totally taken for me particularly. There's certain times where it's helped more than others, but anyways, our church had offered to get us into therapy for free, so there was that. And then I loved podcasts. I listened to podcasts like every day. The Good Life Project was a podcast I listened to a lot. I also really loved business, and naturally those podcasts also talk about personal development because I started building businesses very early on as well. So I read a lot of books just because I needed like some sort of understanding. But yeah, I think podcasts were really like where I dipped my toe in first when I was like 14.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you had the desire at a young age, which really accelerated once the tragic occurrence happened in your life.
Yeah, I think the desire and like the survival, honestly, like I also started getting really severe anxiety because of so my dad got a trach when I was in 7th grade. And so that kind of put our house in a chronic state. Like anyone, if you talk to any of my relatives, my friends, they're like, immediately when I would step into your house, I felt anxious immediately. Just like the whole energy in our house was just like, keep somebody alive. We are in fight mode. And so it was also just like a survival, like I need something to help me just like figure out
regulate
what is happening. Yeah.
Wow. So, okay, you like really, besides the chicken soup for the soul or chicken noodle soup, however you want to say it, and your book, I really don't know of others that are out there for 20-something-year-olds to help them with self-development.
Yeah, there aren't a lot, which is really interesting. And that was when I had the idea. Of course, I started doing market research first, my business brain. And I was like, has this been done? Are there other young people in this space? And I found Meg Jay's book, the psychologist I brought up earlier, and there's the Highly Effective Teens book,
right, by Stephen Covey.
But both of those books were written like 2012, and I'm like, what? what are we doing? And so
Right.
I was
Let's
like, okay,
modernize this a little
clearly,
bit.
yeah, there were some like Christian based teen books, but I was like, there's nothing really else. I don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And you would think everything would have been done and killed to death in the self-help space. And I was like, that's so, yeah, super interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, visionary you are and business person, as you mentioned. So you break your book down into three different things. The first thing that you mention is thing one, which is an ability to identify social constructs that negatively impact the general population. Can
Mhm.
you go into that a little bit? What are those social constructs that people are negatively impacted by?
Yeah. So, yeah, the first section of my book is all about unlearning because I do think you need to unpack the suitcase before you fill it up.
Why can't
And
you just keep the same suitcase and add more to it?
I know, right? Just they open the expander, just stretch it. But yeah, there's I talk particularly to a lot of constructs that affect young people. So the idea is that one, your 20s need to be the best time of your life. I have a lot of kids reach out to me and they're like, I hate school. I'm not having fun. Everyone, I feel like I should be and I'm not. And it's really your teens and 20s are really, really glamorized in movies, in the media, when a lot of people are not having a good time and they are really unwell. And so that's super confusing. I also talk about unpacking for a really long time. My dad was a very money driven individual. And that's what I saw growing up. That was kind of what I thought I should measure my life by. I was also I was a very competitive individual, so I was like, okay, so I measure the success of my life by money and achievements and status.
Mm.
And so that's another thing I talk about in that section where unlearning that XYZ will make you happy and where you can turn your focus to gauge what a successful life looks like. And in that chapter, I talk about living in alignment. And that was where I found peace, where instead of making my happiness based off XYZ success, making it based off of how much peace I feel in any given
Mm.
moment. And if I could live my life in each moment feeling the most peace to my capacity, what a beautiful life I would live. And so I talk about how aligning your actions and priorities with your deepest core values and priorities, that is living in alignment. And
Mm-hmm.
that is what will bring you peace when your head hits the pillow.
100%. I agree with you completely. When I was in public education and administration, I thought I'm just going to go up the chain and work really hard. My parents were really hard workers. My mom was money driven as well. And that's what I associated success with, working
Mm-hmm.
really, really hard and not really focusing on anything else. And I don't mean to bring it to me, but it relates to what you're saying because it wasn't until I was 35 where I started doing self-help, and then
Yep.
36 where I met my husband, actually end of 35, but no, 36. So life didn't really occur for me in the way that it is now until I did the self development and learned the core values and strengths need to align with my intentions and my goals. And in order to have all my cups full and fulfilled, I need to look at all the areas of my life. And we do that in our Course 3C activation too, because so
Mm.
many adults in their 30s and 40s and 50s, even 60s, are coming to us and being like, I am at my wit's end with my job. My boss is
Mm.
putting me on a performance plan. I want to know what I want to do when I grow up. My
Yeah.
relationship is failing, all of these things. And they don't discover who they are at the core until they go through those exercises.
Yeah. It's funny because we think, you're in your 20s and you think, well, when I hit 30 or 40, I'll know who I am. I'll know what I want. When
You
that's
don't just
knowing who you
know.
Yeah, you don't just know. Like there has to be some sort of way to unpack that, because you're also, again, there's a lot to unlearn so that you can get to the core of who you are.
Exactly. You need a mentor. You need the proper sort of friend, guidance, whatever it is, to have the skills and to know the path. I mean, there's like, you have an amazing self-help book and it really gives you the outline. But then in the end, they need someone like you who can then guide them through that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's some form of coach or therapy is incredibly helpful, but there's so many factors to that of, resources and financially. But I think starting with the free stuff can do so much, because it did so much for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, thing number 2 in your book is the exercises, practices, develop understanding of ways to improve your state. So, I know we just got into that a little bit, and the concepts that will allow you to have a healthier relationship with yourself and others. So, why don't you share some other exercises and practices that you go into in the book?
Yeah, yeah. I talk about different, very like tactical communication skills. For example, the idea that, say you're in a conflict with a friend, it's not you two against each other, it's you two against the problem or issue. And that alone can save a lot of relationships, a lot of workplaces. Simple things like that, using the word and instead of but. When you're disagreeing with somebody, so I talk a lot about a lot of very tactical.
Getting rid of always and never.
Yep.
Not bringing up the past.
Yes. So I go into very tactical stuff there. I go into my own. Also, my parents had a pretty rough marriage, and that actually probably affected me even more so than my dad being sick. I'm not an expert, but I share what helped me. I share very deeply. That's actually the longest chapter in the book, is the one about relationships and love.
Isn't relationships everything?
Yeah. And I unpack my experience with that, because that was such a big piece of my journey, and feeling unworthy and feeling undesirable and feeling untrusting. And so I unpack that a lot, and things that gave me peace in that area. I talk about different forms of meditation, that meditation is not just clearing your mind. Somehow the masses got that information, and it's really unfortunate that it's empty brain. Yeah. So yeah, all very, tactical, and also storytelling. It's very storytelling based practices that can help you be in a better state of being. And I say in the book, I'm like, this is information I've collected from my own experiences, and also research and researchers and psychologists. But, take what resonates and leave what doesn't.
Wow, that's a really powerful statement, that you were impacted more by the relationship that your parents had than by your dad being sick.
Yeah, it was a lot.
So I'm a parent,
yeah,
right? I'm a parent, and there's a lot of parents listening to this podcast, and I guarantee you a lot will be listening to this episode, considering we're talking about how to help 20-something-year-olds. What is the number one piece of advice that you would give to parents who are having these communication struggles in front of their kids and having this relationship issue?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The first thing that comes to mind, at least speaking from my own experience and thinking about some of the kids that have reached out to me, because, divorce is such a common thing. And so a lot of young people my age, or high school students, college students, think that, well, it happens to so many people, it doesn't affect me. Like, I should just be fine. I think, one, validating their experiences, because whether, like, even if you're just, if the marriage is struggling, you're not necessarily divorced, it's affecting them, and they're picking up on the energy. And I think sometimes I hear kids talk to me about how my parents are like, well, this is between me and the spouse. Their parents are saying that to them, like, this is between us and you're not involved. And when they are very much involved, and this is very much affecting them. And so I think validating that it is affecting them, and their experience, and also being aware of the information that you're telling them about what goes on, because especially teenagers, because that was a big thing that really did me dirty was learning. My mom pretty much told me every single detail of everything that went on between them. And she knows now that that was not the move. But, at 16, 17, I'm essentially therapizing my parents.
Your brain can't process that. No. It's amazing how that happens too often in a divorced relationship.
Across the board, there's a lot of kids that are essentially their parents' therapists, or they're like the middleman of peacemaking in between their parents. And that's not great.
That's a big barrier to get over. A lot of therapy and EMDR because that really goes into your adult life, in your subconscious.
Yeah.
You're playing the role of the parent to someone who's supposed to be a parent, right? And the parent is acting like a child, not subconsciously, but you're being their parent.
Right.
And that really takes a toll on you as an adult. It did on me also. And going into your thing one, it's like unpacking all of that, like not even realizing that is that like burden that you've worn on your chest and your sleeves for so long. I mean, you're 22. For those of you who are listening, Livi is 22 and she has learned all of these things at such a young age and is able to clearly express them in a way that's helping her and helping her listeners. And I think it's fantastic. And you even said, there's so much more that you've learned since you've written this book, which was only a year and a half ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would like to highlight something that you said, where that's actually something I talk about in part 1, Unlearning, which is the idea that young people are young and dumb, and that is what they are, and that is what they should be. And there's a level of that, of course. There's development happening. We're going to do dumb stuff. But young people and young people are very, very, very capable. Even children, they're so capable of developing emotional skills, developing mindfulness, having conversations just like this. Like I don't see myself as any more capable than my audience. These are really smart, intellectual, in touch young people. And even kids that are just getting started or having interest. There's just, any parent, if you see, I feel like most parents are amazed by the development of their child and seeing the way that they learn. And, I think it's a shame that we've just sort of been like, well, they're dumb and stupid and it's fine. When in reality,
it's labeling. It's labeling.
Yeah, they do want this information. They can use this information, and they're more than capable to, apply it into their daily life if they want to.
Totally. Now, the human brain develops all the way until you're 25. And also, if you have ADHD or some other neurodevelopmental disorders, it could be through the age of 30. So your brain is developing still, right? So there is a level of that, and there is a level of human experience. Now, you've experienced a lot more than some people older than you have, right?
Yeah.
But to label someone as young and dumb, that's silly, right? That's also like saying that someone who's older is old and senile.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that they can't, do physical activities, or, obviously there's a level of that. But...
my dad is 73, he's turning 73 December 1st. And he can still beat me in tennis, and he can still remember a shit ton more than I can. So
yeah, which I do. I talk about that in my book too. I bring up people in their 60s, 70s, 80s that are doing incredible things. And so I talk about that a lot, that every area of your life can have incredible things. Because there's also a lot of dread about turning 30 in your 20s.
Hey, I'm turning 40 in a few months.
Yeah, and it's like,
I remember that. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
It's a number.
whatever. Yeah.
It's a number. It's a
Yeah.
number. Okay, so you talk about exercises, practices, develop understanding, and then the third part of your book is the guidance and knowledge on how to improve your experience moving forward when it comes to decision making, goal
Mm-hmm.
setting, and action taking.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yes.
provide navigation there.
Yeah, so then I go into unlearning and then being and then doing. So I go into the doing, then that's more about time, decision making, accountability. In that area, I go more into decision making, for example. I talk a lot in there of different questions you can run with yourself to see if this is a decision you actually want to make. For example, a lot of times we ask ourselves what we should do and never, almost never, ask ourselves the question what we want to do. And so I talk about things like that. And asking ourselves the questions we rarely give ourselves the space to ask. I talk about different ways you can try out structuring your day so you feel more productive, feel that you have used your time in a way that you would have liked. A lot of different self-awareness questions and then tactical decision making and productivity as well.
This is huge. And like I said, I'm teaching this to 30, 40, 50, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, right? So for someone who's reading your book, who's in their 20-somethings, these tools can work for any age.
Yeah.
What I'm gathering really is you, as a young 20-something, have that relatability, right? Which is what you talk about in your social media, relating. And they're going to be more attracted to listening and reading it from someone who's their age rather than some 40, 50-year-old that you got that information from or started learning your self-development journey when you were 17, 16. So I appreciate that you put it into a way where people can really relate and gravitate towards your wording.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I really just wanted the book to be a safe space for someone to like dip their toes in if they wanted to and just feel seen. And that's something I've been really grateful for in this journey. I seem to really resonate with a big audience of people. I have a lot of men that follow me, which is not always common for a woman in the self-help space. I have a lot of queer people that follow me that resonate with the things that I talk about. Just people from a lot of different backgrounds that resonate with different pieces of who I am. And I feel honored to have those audiences that can find a piece of themselves in my story. And that's been very exciting too, that I've been welcomed with open arms by so many different communities.
Well, you talk about decision making. We have thousands of decisions on a daily basis that we have to make. And the one thing that's not a hard one is to follow Livi. She has a huge following on TikTok. Can you share that with our audience here?
Yeah, my TikTok, my Instagram is just Livi Redden, Livirdden.
Okay. You mentioned still in the beginning phases of your book is to choose to heal.
It is very much a choice. And I actually did a keynote on this, and it was the idea that time doesn't heal all wounds. Healing is a very intentional choice. Leaving a victim mindset is a very intentional choice. Taking accountability for not necessarily what happened to you maybe, but where you go from here. It's a choice, and oftentimes it really sucks because especially when you're young, and I talk about this in the book as well, a lot of the traumatic things that have occurred to you had nothing to do with it, particularly often when you're young. It was unfair and it sucked. And so to feel like, okay, so now I have to take accountability to heal from something that I didn't ask for this. And that's really difficult. But I think what a beautiful example of self-love and self-respect to take the reins when maybe they were taken from you and choose your own peace. Like, what better empowering, loving thing to do for yourself then choose to not let someone let you suffer chronically.
Wow. I'm speechless. So if someone is choosing to heal, how do they choose? What's the first step?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, let me just grab this. I go through in the book, so I have mapped out sort of, because we hear a lot about healing. It's not always totally defined for us. Like, what is healing? How do I know if I've healed? How do I know that I am healing? And so I created this.
And are you ever really healed 100%?
No. I mean, you're a human being. Things will naturally, you might think you've moved past it and it comes back up from a new situation presented. But I created this healing process. It looks kind of like a target. And it kind of lays out what the healing process is, what it looks like. And so that very first step in the circle, the very inner circle, is awareness. And actually coming to terms with the fact and leaving that state of denial that something is affecting you. And myself, there's been certain things where I was like, no, I don't have like any sort of PTSD from my dad being sick, or like me at 14 like suctioning a trach, or like saving somebody's life multiple times.
Oh my gosh, it sounds like, I mean, I'm no therapist here, but it's not just PTSD. It sounds like complex, like compacted trauma.
Yeah. And so there were things where I was just like, but I'm fine. It's like I'm functioning. It's fine. And it's funny because it wasn't even until recently where I was like, actually, I have a very intense, like trauma-based emotional flip where if I get too overwhelmed, I go completely apathetic. I am so numb to everyone, everything, myself. Like, I don't get emotional. I don't get emotional. I dissociate. I am just completely apathetic to everything. And I didn't even connect those dots until about a year ago.
Well, that's impressive that you know what that is.
And so there's things like that where it's you're constantly uncovering, you're constantly gonna find stuff in that stage 1 awareness piece that, oh, this maybe this is negatively affecting me, or maybe you can't even put your finger on what's negatively affecting you, but something is consistently disrupting your peace. And then that's probably something to get curious about.
Totally. Wow. This is really a powerful conversation. And whatever point you're listening into today's podcast with Livi Redden, there's so much to unpack. There's so much to take away. I highly recommend that you share this with your children as well. I know that I am going to, I have a 10 and a 12-year-old stepsons, and I am definitely going to share this book with my 12-year-old. He has a very high emotional intelligence, and I think that there's so much that he can gather from sooner.
Yeah.
It's so helpful, and definitely going to share this with my clients as well. So, Livi, what's one thing? I always like to leave people with one thing that you would recommend, the biggest thing that you would want people to take away from today's conversation.
Biggest thing I'd like them to take away. There's so many things I'm trying to figure out. I mean, the biggest thing that comes to mind that I think often we forget just as human beings, allowing yourself to not label certain aspects of the human experience as good or bad, and that goes into so many areas of life. I mean, we label our emotions as good or bad when really they're all just human. Myself, for a long time, I thought, I hadn't grown enough if I found myself getting too angry about something or too sad about something, these more uncomfortable emotions, when that's humanness. The way I deal with it that's something I can work with. But like accepting yourself in all of your humanness and all of your weirdness and all of your quirkiness, your cringiness, accepting those uncomfortable emotions for what they are because they are okay. Accepting your experiences as a piece of you, trying to not reject certain areas of yourself. There's just, I think, accepting the really messed up, beautiful tragedy that is humanness can bring you a lot of peace, because it's, it's always a little bit messy.
Yes, it is always a little bit messy. And I love there's no emotion that's a good emotion or a bad emotion. It's just emotion. And there's a whole wheel of emotions, but it doesn't say good or bad on it.
Right.
All right, Livi. Well, thank you so much for being on Successful with ADHD today.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, I know this is going to touch a lot of students and parents who are doing their best and want to do even better. I will definitely, in the show notes, leave your information so people can check out your book and find you on TikTok and Instagram and all the amazing places you're on.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And also, if anybody, I do have a text community. If anybody is interested, it's US and Canada. If you're out of US and Canada, I have a broadcast channel on Instagram. And all that is I just send out a little text reminder once or twice a week that reminds you to take a deep breath or, give yourself a little credit. So if you want little reminders,
I love that.
Put it in the show notes.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to this episode of Successful with ADHD. I hope it helps you on your journey. And if you need any additional support for you or a loved one with ADHD, feel free to reach out to us at coachingwithbrooke.com and all social media platforms at Coaching with Brooke. And remember, it's Brooke with an E. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.